The scraping above the bedroom ceiling stopped the second I sat up. I sat there with my hand on the flashlight and did not breathe for a long count. Then I heard it again, a slow, careful drag of weight from one side of the crawl space to the other, and I understood that whatever was up there had heard me sit up too. My name is Travis. I write software for a small company out of Beaverton, and last October I had 2 projects due in the same week. I do not focus well at home. My apartment sits above a coffee shop off Southeast Division, and the delivery trucks start around 5 in the morning, and my downstairs neighbor plays bass guitar until 11 at night, and if I try to work at the kitchen table for more than an hour, I start making excuses to open the refrigerator. So when my girlfriend Haley told me about a cabin her uncle sometimes rented from a guy up near government camp, I asked her to send me the number. The owner was named Ellery, and Mr. Ellery only rented by the week. He answered the phone on the 3rd ring and told me to meet him at a gas station off Highway 26 the following Sunday. He also told me the cabin did not have Wi-Fi, which was fine because I had a mobile hotspot, and that the water came from a well I would need to prime once when I got there. He said the last renter had left it working, and he had not been up since. He said this in a voice that suggested the not going up had been going on for a while. I drove up on a Sunday afternoon in late October. The trees along Highway 26 had already turned rust and gold, and the wind coming off the pass had that early winter bite to it. I met Mr. Ellery at a gas station near Rhododendron, and he was exactly what I expected. Older man, maybe 70, plaid coat, work boots, caked in dried mud from something that was not his yard. He drove a green Ford F-250 with a broken taillight. He shook my hand and said, "Follow me up, kid," and I did. The cabin sat about a mile and a half off Forest Road 2450, up a gravel driveway that wound through hemlock and Doug fir until the trees opened onto a clearing. The cabin itself was 2 stories, wood siding gone gray, a metal roof, a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs on it, and a shed off to the side that leaned about 6 degrees off vertical. The well pump sat in a small pump house near the shed. There were no other cabins visible, no power lines. Just a propane tank behind the cabin and a satellite dish on the roof that Mr. Ellery said had never been hooked up to anything. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood smoke and dust. The main floor had a small kitchen, a living room with a wood stove, a bathroom, and a back bedroom. A ladder in the hallway went up to a loft with a queen bed and a low ceiling. Above the loft was another crawl space, Mr. Ellery told me, which he only mentioned because the access panel was in the loft ceiling and it sometimes rattled in the wind. He said not to worry about it. He said the panel was screwed shut. He showed me the well, showed me the propane, showed me the wood stove and the stack of split fir under the porch. He showed me where the flashlights were and where the first aid kit was and where the shotgun shells were, which I thought was strange because he did not show me a shotgun. He said the shotgun was in a locked case in the back closet and he did not have the key. He said the shells had been there when he bought the place. He said he had never gotten around to throwing them out. Then he handed me a paper bag with 2 rolls of paper towels in it, said "Welcome to the mountain," and got in his truck and drove back down the gravel. I unpacked. I stocked the little pantry with everything I had brought from a Fred Meyer and Sandy on my way up, which was mostly canned soup, a bag of coffee, oatmeal, bread, peanut butter, apples, and a case of bottled water because I did not fully trust a well I had just primed myself. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table with a view out the front window toward the drive. I called Haley to tell her I had made it. She was still at work in Portland, and she said she would try to come up on Thursday if she could get out of a meeting. I said okay. I said the place was perfect. I said I might not want to come back down. That was true when I said it. By Monday night, I had put in 12 hours on the laptop and eaten 3 cans of soup, and I felt good in a way I had not felt in weeks. The quiet up there was a different kind of quiet than I was used to. In the city, quiet just means the neighbors are asleep. Up on the mountain, quiet is the sound of trees breathing. I went to bed in the loft around 11, and I slept hard, and I did not hear anything. Tuesday morning was when I noticed the first thing. I had left a loaf of bread on the counter the night before. Sourdough from a bakery in Sandy, still wrapped in its brown paper. When I came down to make coffee, the loaf was in the same spot. The paper was folded the same way, but the tie at the top was a different tie. I know this because I had used a green twist tie the night before, and now it was a red one. I stood there in my sweatpants and stared at that red twist tie for probably a full minute. Then I told myself I was working too hard, that I had forgotten what color tie I had used, that maybe there had been a red tie in the bag from Fred Meyer, and I had grabbed it without looking. I made my coffee. I sat down at the laptop. I forgot about it. Around noon, I went outside to get more firewood off the porch, and I noticed a boot print in the dirt near the well pump. It was not my boot print. Mine were Merrill's with a distinctive tread. This one was flat and squared off, like a work boot. It could have been Mr. Ellery's, I thought, from Sunday. But Sunday it had rained, and the print I was looking at was dry and pressed clean. I do not know why I did not leave right then. I have thought about that a lot since. I think part of it was that I had a deadline. I think part of it was that I did not want to feel like the kind of guy who runs from a boot print. I think mostly it was that the story I had already told myself, the story about a solo work retreat in a mountain cabin, was too good to abandon over a twist tie and a shoe mark. I called Haley on my lunch break, and I mentioned the boot print. She asked if I wanted her to come up early. I said no. I said it was probably the owner checking on the place, or a neighbor from another cabin walking the property line. I said I was fine. I said it in the voice you use when you want the other person to agree with you. She said, "Okay, Trav, but be careful." She said, "If anything else weird happens, you call me." I said I would. Tuesday afternoon, I got a lot of work done. Tuesday night, I went to bed early. I heard nothing, and I slept fine. Wednesday morning, I went to the pantry to get oatmeal, and there was 1 can of soup missing. Now, I had counted the cans when I put them away. I do this because I am a person who counts things, especially when I am working under a deadline and I am trying to plan out my meals so I do not have to drive down to Rhododendron in the middle of the week. I had put 12 cans in the pantry Sunday night. I had eaten 3 by Wednesday morning. That should have left 9. There were 8. I stood in the pantry and I counted them 3 times. I moved them around. I looked behind them. I looked under the shelf. I even checked the trash to make sure I had not somehow eaten a 4th can and thrown it out without remembering. There was no 4th can in the trash. There were 3 cans in the trash. And there were 8 cans on the shelf. I sat down at the kitchen table and I looked out the window at the trees for a while. Then I got up and I checked the front door. It was still locked. I checked the back door. It was still locked. I checked all the windows on the ground floor. Every one of them was latched. I checked the basement door, which led down a narrow set of stairs to a dirt-floored crawl space that Mr. Ellery had not shown me because there was nothing down there but the water heater and the septic line. The door was still bolted from the kitchen side. I called Haley. I told her about the can. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Travis, come home." She said, "Come home right now, and if you cannot come home, you go stay in a motel in Sandy, but you do not stay in that cabin another night." I told her I would think about it. I told her I had a lot of work to do. I told her I was probably losing my mind because I had been working too hard, and I would take the afternoon off and go for a hike, and if anything else happened, I would come down. She said, "Promise me." I said, "I promise." I did not go for a hike. I sat at the kitchen table and worked, and I kept looking at the pantry, and I kept looking at the loft ladder in the hallway, and I kept thinking about that access panel in the ceiling. The one Mr. Ellery said was screwed shut. Around 4 in the afternoon, I climbed the ladder to the loft, and I looked at the panel. It was a plain square of unfinished plywood set into a wooden frame in the ceiling. There were 4 screws holding it in place, 1 at each corner. 3 of the screws were flush with the wood. 1 was not. 1 was sitting about a 1/4 inch proud, like someone had backed it out and started to put it back and had not quite tightened it down. I got down off the bed and I stood in the loft for a long time looking at that screw. Then I climbed down the ladder and I went to the truck and I got a headlamp and a claw hammer from the toolbox in the bed. I do not know what I was going to do with the hammer. I think I just wanted something heavy in my hand. I climbed back up. I put on the headlamp. I stood on the bed, and I loosened the loose screw the rest of the way with my fingers and let it drop into my palm. Then I put it in my pocket. I loosened the other 3 the same way. When the last one came out, the plywood panel dropped about half an inch, and I caught it and lowered it to the bed. I stood there for a second before I raised the headlamp. Then I did. The crawl space above the loft was about 4 feet high at the peak and ran the length of the cabin. It was dry and dusty and smelled like old wood. In the beam of my headlamp, I could see the roof rafters and the pink fiberglass insulation between them. The insulation had been compressed in a long, shallow trough that ran from the access panel to a spot near the far end of the crawl space. At the far end, tucked into the corner where the roof came down to meet the wall, was a sleeping bag. It was rolled out, not neatly. The zipper was open. There was a small backpack next to it, and a paper grocery bag, and what looked like a 2-liter plastic bottle that had been cut in half and was being used as a container for something. There was a folded piece of cardboard laid over the fiberglass under the bag to insulate it, I guess. There was a plastic bag next to the head of the sleeping bag with a wadded-up T-shirt in it. There was no one in the crawl space right then. I climbed back down the ladder very slowly. My hands had started shaking. I sat on the loft bed and I looked up at the open square in the ceiling and I tried to think. I called Haley. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be. I said, "Haley, someone has been living in the crawl space above me." She said, "What?" I said, "Someone has been living in the crawl space, right above where I sleep. There is a sleeping bag up there. There is stuff up there. It has been there a while." She said, "Travis, get in the truck. Get in the truck right now." I said I was going to. I said I was going to hang up and go. She said, "Do not hang up." She said, "Keep me on the phone." I said, "Okay." I put the plywood panel back over the access hole. I did not screw it in. I just set it back. Then I climbed down the ladder and I walked through the cabin picking up my things. Laptop, charger, phone, wallet, keys. I left the food. I left the clothes. I did not go back for the shotgun shells or anything else. I just walked out the front door with Haley on speaker, and I got in the truck. That is when I saw him. He came around the side of the cabin from the back, walking fast but not running. He was maybe 50, weathered, thin, wearing a dark coat and a knit cap and the same flat tread work boots I had seen the print of by the well. He had a canvas bag over his shoulder. He was not carrying a weapon that I could see. He was not looking at me the way I would have expected. He was looking at me the way you look at someone whose plans you have accidentally ruined. I locked the doors of the truck. He walked up to the driver's side window and he stopped about 4 feet away and he held up both hands. Then he said something. I could not hear him through the window. Haley was in my ear asking what was happening. I rolled the window down about an inch. I said, "Back up." I said, "Back up right now." He backed up 2 steps. He kept his hands where I could see them. He said, "I am not going to hurt you." He said, "I am sorry." He said, "Please do not call the police." I said, "Who are you?" He said, "My name is Otis. I used to do work for Mr. Ellery." I said, "How long have you been up there?" He said, "Since August." I have been telling this part of the story to people for over a year now, and every time I get to that answer, I still feel my hands get cold. Since August. That was almost 3 months. 3 months in a crawl space above a cabin that was mostly empty. He had a system. He had a routine. He had a life up there. I said, "Back up further." He backed up further. I put the truck in gear. I said, "I am going to leave now, Otis." I said, "I am going to call the sheriff from town." I said, "I would suggest you take your things and go before they get here." I do not know why I said that. I do not know if I was trying to be kind or if I was trying to be careful about how a cornered person might behave. Both, probably. He said, "Okay." He said, "I am sorry." Then he stood there in the driveway with his hands still half raised, and he watched me back the truck around, and he watched me pull down the gravel toward the forest road. In the mirror, I could see him standing there getting smaller. When I got to the turn onto the gravel, he was still standing exactly where I had left him, hands still at his sides, watching me go. I drove all the way to a truck stop in Sandy before I stopped. I got out and I stood in the parking lot next to my truck, and I called 911. and I told the dispatcher what had happened. She was patient and calm, and she took the details, and she said a deputy would meet me at the truck stop. Then she said, "Sir, do you need medical assistance?" I said no. She said, "Are you sure?" I said I was sure, but my legs were shaking so hard I had to lean against the truck to stay standing. The deputy who came out was a woman named Barrett. She was maybe 40, short brown hair, and she wore the calm face people wear when they do this job for a living. She took my statement, she took the coordinates of the cabin, and she asked if I would go up with her and a second unit to point out where the sleeping bag was. I said I would. I did not want to, but I said I would. We drove up in a convoy of 3 vehicles. When we pulled onto the gravel drive, the cabin was exactly as I had left it. Front door still open. Truck tracks in the dust. No sign of Otis in the yard. He was still in the crawl space. They found him sitting on the sleeping bag with his hands folded in his lap. He did not resist. He did not say anything when they cuffed him. Deputy Barrett told me later that he had a wallet on him with an expired Oregon driver's license and $42 in cash. He had a folded piece of paper in his coat pocket with a phone number written on it. She said the phone number was for a woman in Estacada who turned out to be his sister. He had not spoken to her since March. Deputy Barrett walked me through the cabin after they took Otis down the mountain. She showed me his system. He had a small camp stove up in the crawl space. He had a plastic bin of matches and a few utensils. She took me around to the back of the cabin and showed me the gable vent up under the eave. It was a small louvered wooden panel meant to keep the crawl space from getting damp. Otis had unscrewed the fixing brackets on it years ago, and he had rehung it on a pair of small hinges. From the ground you could not see the difference. From the top of the woodpile stacked against that side of the cabin you could reach it in a step. That was how he came and went. He had been at the well when I opened the ceiling panel, refilling his water jug, which was why the sleeping bag had been empty when I looked. And that was how he had climbed back up after I drove away, because he had nowhere else to be. She said he had been eating 1 can of soup a week from the pantries of the cabins Mr. Ellery rented out, spread across several properties. He had been careful never to take enough from any one place that anyone would notice. She said that was probably why he had taken the twist tie off my bread and put a different one back. He had opened the bag to see if it was edible, and then had used one of his own ties to close it because he did not remember where mine had gone. He had made a mistake because he was tired, or because he was hungry, or because he was human. She said, he had been up there almost the entire time you were. I said, why did he not just leave? She said, "Sir, he had nowhere to leave to." She told me that Otis had worked for Mr. Ellery about 12 years ago, doing seasonal handyman jobs on the properties, roof patches, well maintenance, that sort of thing. He had known every one of Mr. Ellery's cabins. He had known the schedules, the rental patterns, the layouts, the access panels. When his wife had left him, he had lost the trailer he lived in outside of Boring, Oregon. He had drifted. He had been sleeping in the woods for most of the summer. When the temperatures dropped in September, he had started using the cabins. He had chosen mine because Mr. Ellery had told me it was rarely rented in the winter, and Mr. Ellery had probably told him that too, back when they had worked together. I asked Deputy Barrett what would happen to him. She said, he will be charged with criminal trespass. She said, he might get some help. She said it the way you say a thing you have said too many times to a person like me who did not know what to do with it. Then she gave me her card and she asked me to please leave the property and stay somewhere else for the night, and to please not come back to that cabin again. I did not. I drove down to Portland that night, and I did not go home to my apartment. I went to Haley's place, and I sat on her couch, and I ate a bowl of soup she made me, chicken noodle, the kind with the little stars in it. I sat there and I ate the whole bowl, and I did not say anything for a long time. That was almost 2 years ago now. I still do not sleep well when I am alone. I have moved in with Haley. I like knowing there is another person in the house. I like knowing that if I hear a sound above the ceiling, I can turn to her and she will hear it too. I have not stayed a night alone since. I do not know if I will again. Sometimes when the house is very quiet, I think about how long it took me to notice one missing can. 12 cans. I lost one. It sat in a pantry with 11 of its neighbors, and I did not know it was gone until 3 days later. And that whole time there was a man in the ceiling learning my routine and waiting for me to leave, and when I did not leave, when I stayed and worked and slept and ate and slept again, he did not come for me. He did not come down the ladder in the middle of the night. He did not lay a hand on me. He waited. He waited for 3 months in a crawl space, and for 4 days above my bed, and I never heard him breathe. I think about that a lot. I still count the cans in my pantry now, even in Haley's apartment, even with her sleeping 10 feet away. I count them at night, and I write the number on a scrap of paper, and I check it in the morning. Because what I know now is that a person can go a long time without making a sound if they are quiet enough and if they have practiced and if they have nowhere else to go. The drill started up in the wall behind my headboard on a Wednesday afternoon, and I sat up in bed and I did not know what I was hearing. I had been asleep with a fever for 2 hours, and my house was supposed to be empty except for me. What was coming through the wall was a corded drill running under a hand that was pressing hard, and it was doing it slowly, the way a person drills when they do not want to be heard. My name is Bennett. I work as a claims adjuster for an insurance company out of southeast Portland, and last September I signed a 12-month lease on a house on Southeast 67th, just off Woodstock Boulevard. It was a small one-story bungalow with a gravel driveway and a covered porch and a fenced yard that had been let go by whoever lived there before me. The rent was low for the neighborhood, and my landlord, Mrs. Pham, told me the reason was that the last tenant had broken the lease and moved out in a hurry. She said he had left the place a mess. She said her son had come in over the summer and repainted the interior. She said the locks had been changed, and she handed me 2 brass keys on a plastic tab. The house sat between a duplex on the north side and an older single family on the south side. The old man in the single family was named Owen. Owen was maybe 70, still worked part-time at a hardware store on Foster, kept a black cat named Pippi who patrolled the fence line every morning. He was the kind of neighbor who came over the second I moved my first box in from the U-Haul and stood in my driveway with a can of Coors Light and told me every piece of neighborhood gossip he could think of. He told me about the guy who had lived in my house before me. He said his name had been Trent. Trent had lived there about 4 years. Owen said Trent had been an okay guy, quiet, kept to himself. Went to work every morning in a work truck with a plumbing company logo on the side. And then, one summer weekend, a couple of police cars had shown up, and Trent had been walked out of the house in handcuffs. Owen did not know what for. He said Mrs. Pham had come by a few days later and started cleaning the place out. I lived there for about 6 weeks before anything happened. The first thing was the pantry. I keep my pantry organized because my mother trained me to. Cans on the top shelf with the labels facing out. Boxes on the middle shelf. Dry goods in glass jars on the bottom. It is a habit I do not think about. I had done my pantry the day I moved in, and I had kept it that way. So when I came home from work one Friday night in October and opened the pantry to get a can of tomatoes, I could see right away that the cans had been turned around. Not all of them. Just 3 or 4 on the front row. The labels were facing the back of the cabinet instead of the front, like someone had taken them down, looked at them, and put them back without paying attention to the orientation. I stood there in the kitchen looking at those cans, and I thought, that is a weird thing to notice. That is a weird thing to worry about. And I closed the pantry, and I made dinner, and I did not think about it again for a week. The second thing was the window in the back bedroom. I do not use the back bedroom. It is the smaller of the two, and I use the front bedroom because it gets better light. The back bedroom has a bed frame my sister gave me when I moved in, and a stack of moving boxes I have not unpacked. I only go in there to grab something out of a box maybe once a week. The last time I had gone in on a Saturday morning to find a specific coffee filter I had packed, the window over the bed had been closed and latched. I know this because I had checked all the windows the day I moved in and had noted which ones had working latches. That window did. The next time I went in on a Tuesday evening, the window was open about 2 inches at the bottom. Not enough to be noticeable at a glance. Not enough to let in cold air. Just enough that if I had walked past without looking, I would have missed it. I closed it. I latched it. I stood there and I stared at the latch for a while, and then I went and I got a butter knife from the kitchen, and I checked whether that latch could be jiggled open from outside. It could, if you were careful. I could see the scratches on the paint of the sill where something thin had been slid in and pushed. I called Mrs. Pham the next morning. I told her about the window and the latch, and I told her I would like the locks changed. She told me the locks had already been changed. She told me her son had done it in June before I moved in. She said she would ask her son to come by and take a look at the window latch, but that it was probably nothing, and that southeast Portland had a lot of squirrels, and that squirrels could jimmy a window latch if they wanted to. I did not point out that a squirrel could not slide a butter knife between the sash and the frame. I just thanked her and hung up. The son never came. The third thing was the closet in the hallway. The hallway in that house was short. 3 doors on the left, 1 on the right. Bedroom, bedroom, bathroom on the left. Storage closet on the right. The storage closet was maybe 2 feet deep and held the water heater and a stacked washer-dryer unit. There was no floor to it. It was open dirt for the last 6 inches at the bottom, behind the washer, where the plumbing came up out of the crawl space. Mrs. Pham had told me not to worry about it. She said it was original to the house. One Saturday morning in late October, I opened the closet to move the laundry over from the washer to the dryer, and I noticed a small pile of sawdust on the plywood floor behind the washer. Fresh sawdust. Pale wood. Not the dark old fir from the house framing. It was pine sawdust, the kind you get from a 2x4. I did not touch it. I closed the closet. I stood in the hallway. I thought. Then I went and I checked the wall behind the washer. Nothing. I checked the wall behind the water heater. Nothing. I got a flashlight and I looked into the crawl space through the little gap under the washer. What I could see of the crawl space looked normal. Just dirt and copper pipes and the underside of the floor joists. I told myself that Mrs. Pham's son had come by after all, that he had done some work I did not know about, that there was a reasonable explanation. I called Owen from next door and I asked him if he had seen anyone at the house on any weekday recently. Owen thought for a while. He said, "Well, yeah, actually." He said, "I saw a fellow walking up your driveway on Tuesday morning around 10. He said he had a tool bag with him. He said, I figured he was your landlord's guy." Owen said, "Blonde hair, kind of thin, wearing a Carhartt jacket." I asked Owen if he had ever seen that guy before. Owen said, "Well, sure, that is Trent. That was the guy who lived there before you." That was the moment my stomach dropped. I asked Owen if he was sure. Owen said he had gained some weight, but that was Trent, no question. He said, "I did not think anything of it. I thought he had come by to grab something he had left. I thought maybe your landlord had asked him to." I hung up. I sat on my couch. I looked around in my living room. For the next 4 days, I did not sleep well. I looked at my apartment differently. I noticed things I had not noticed before. The way one of the outlet covers in the kitchen was set slightly crooked, as if it had been unscrewed and put back. The way the vent grill in the bathroom ceiling was not sitting flush anymore. The way the trim board along the base of the wall in the hallway was pulled forward about 1/8 of an inch from where it should have been. I started documenting things. I took photos with my phone, photos of the pantry with the cans facing the wrong way when I found them like that again the next Wednesday, this time only 2 cans. Photos of the sawdust in the closet, which had grown by a small handful and had migrated a few inches toward the door. Photos of the outlet cover. Photos of the trim board. I sent them all to my sister in Eugene with a message that said, "Tell me I am not losing my mind." She called me back within 10 minutes. She said, "Bennett, get out of that house. Go stay in a hotel." I did not go to a hotel. I did not want to feel like I was being run out of my own home. I told her I was going to be careful, and that I was going to call the landlord again, and that I was going to talk to Owen about maybe keeping an eye on the driveway during the day. Cassidy said, "That is not a plan, Bennett. That is you talking yourself into staying." I stayed anyway. That week I bought a chain lock at the hardware store on Foster where Owen worked. Owen sold it to me himself. He asked what it was for, and I told him I was tired of feeling exposed. He said he understood. He installed it for me that Saturday, right up above the deadbolt, and he tested it 3 times to make sure it caught cleanly. He said, "Kid, if you hear anything, you knock on the wall between our houses. It is thin. I will hear it." I said I would. I do not know if I meant it. It seemed like a childish arrangement to have with an old man across a plank wall, but I thanked him. For the next few nights I was careful. I set the chain every night. I checked the windows before bed. I started sleeping with my phone under the pillow instead of on the nightstand. I thought about buying a camera and pointing it at the driveway, but I did not. I told myself that I had made the house harder to get into, and that would be enough. I told myself that whoever had been coming in would notice the chain and would stop coming. The chain does not work if you are already inside the house when the door closes. The chain does not help if the person who has been letting himself in has been letting himself in at 9 or 10 in the morning after I have already left for work. He did not need the front door open at night. He had been coming in during the day and leaving before I got home. All the chain did was keep him from doing what he had never planned to do. I called Mrs. Pham. I told her Owen had seen a man matching the description of the former tenant walking up to the house on a Tuesday morning while I was at work. She said, "Well, that is impossible, Bennett." She said, "Trent does not have a key." She said, "We changed the locks." I asked her if it was possible he had made a copy of the old key at some point during his 4 years living there. She was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said she would call the police. She did not call the police. Or if she did, they did not come. I went to work Monday and Tuesday of the next week. Wednesday morning I woke up with a fever of 101.6. I called in sick. I unhooked the chain to check the porch for a package I was expecting, saw nothing, and shuffled back to bed without hooking it again. I took Tylenol, and I slept. I woke up around 2 in the afternoon to the sound of a drill. It was coming from behind my headboard. Not the wall between my bedroom and the hallway, the other wall. The exterior wall of the house, which shared its interior side with the back of the storage closet in the hallway, someone was drilling into a stud. Slow, careful, patient drilling. The kind of drilling you do when you do not want to be heard. I sat up in bed and I did not breathe. I could hear him. I could hear him breathing on the other side of that wall. It was slow and heavy and a little bit ragged. He was working hard. I picked up my phone off the nightstand. I muted it. I opened it up. I did not know if my bedroom door was open or closed. I did not know if he had seen my keys hanging on the hook by the front door. I did not know if he had seen my shoes. I did not know how long he had been in there or how many times he had done this while I was at work. I dialed 911 and I held the phone to my ear. The dispatcher answered. I kept my voice as low as I could. I told her the address. I told her a man was in my house. I told her he was drilling into the wall. She said, "Are you in the house right now?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Can you get out safely?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "Stay on the line." She said, "Do not confront him." She said, "Units are on the way." I got out of bed as quietly as I could. My legs were shaking. I was still in a t-shirt and sweatpants. I did not have shoes on. I did not go to the front door, because I would have had to walk down the hallway right past the closet where he was. I went to the window in my bedroom. It was one of the sash windows with the working latch. I unlatched it, and I pushed it up, and it made a soft grinding sound as it went. I held my breath. The drill was still going. He had not heard. I crawled out the window. The ground was maybe 4 feet down. I landed on my elbows in the flower bed, and I stayed low, and I moved along the side of the house toward the fence between me and Owen's yard. I could see Owen's kitchen window from where I was. I did not want to shout. I made it to the fence, and I climbed it, which was harder than I thought because it was a 6-foot cedar fence, and I was in socks, and I had a fever, and I dropped into Owen's side yard, and I ran up to his back door, and I knocked. Owen opened the door. He looked at me standing there in my socks and my t-shirt with my phone in my hand, and he did not say anything for a second. Then he said, "Come in. Just come in." I sat at his kitchen table with the dispatcher still on the line, and I told her where I was now. Owen made me a cup of tea, and he did not ask what was happening because I think he could see I was in no condition to explain it. He stood at his window, and he looked at my house across the fence. The police came 6 minutes later. 2 units, both marked. Quiet approach, no lights. They parked out at the curb. I watched from Owen's window. 2 officers went up onto my porch. One went around the side toward the back. They knocked again. Then they went in through the front door, which meant the door had been unlocked because Trent had come in through the door because he had a key. They were in there for maybe 10 minutes. Then one of them came out onto the porch and waved to me across the fence. I went with Owen to the front, and I met her in my own driveway. She was maybe 35, red hair pulled back, and her name badge said Halloran. She said, "We have him. He is in the back of the second car." She said, "Are you the tenant?" I said, "I was." She said, "We would like you to come in and identify what we found." I went in. Owen came with me. Officer Halloran walked me down the hallway to the storage closet, and she pointed at the wall behind the water heater. Trent had cut a rectangle into the drywall about the size of a paperback book. The cutout piece was leaning against the water heater. Inside the hole, sitting in the wall cavity between 2 studs, was a length of white PVC pipe about 18 inches long, capped at both ends with plastic caps and sealed with silicone. Halloran had gloves on. She reached in and lifted it out. She said, "We have not opened it, but he told us what is in it." She said $12,000. She said Trent had been paroled in July from a state facility over near Salem. He had gone in for a possession charge and something to do with stolen property. He had been out for about 3 months. She said he had done that plumbing job on the house himself 3 years earlier, when he still lived there. He had run that PVC pipe up into the wall cavity as a hiding place for cash he did not want anywhere a police search could find. Then he had gone to prison before he could get it back out. When he had gotten out, he had come to Mrs. Pham's, and he had seen a new tenant living in the house, and he had known he could not just ask. So he had waited. He had used the key he had made himself a copy of back when he still lived there. He had learned my work schedule by watching the driveway from a car parked 2 blocks away. He had let himself in on weekday mornings and worked on the wall a little at a time. Cutting through drywall makes noise, but only if you are in a hurry. He had not been in a hurry. He had been working through it with a cordless drill and a small handsaw over the course of at least 4 visits. Halloran said, "On a normal day, you would have been at work." I said, "I know." She said, "He did not come here to hurt you." I said, "I know." She said, "Sometimes when we corner people, they do things they had not planned to." She said, "You did the right thing going out the window." Trent was charged with residential burglary and violation of parole. Mrs. Pham did in fact have the locks changed that week, for real this time, and she took 20% off my next month's rent and offered to let me break the lease. I broke it. I moved out at the end of November. I live in an apartment on the 3rd floor now. There is a security door in the lobby. There is a camera in the hallway. My deadbolt is a Schlage with a thumb turn. I still count the cans in my pantry when I get home from work. I still check the windows on the back side of the building even though I am on the 3rd floor and no one is climbing up there. I saw Owen a few times before I moved out. He would come over and check on me in the evenings. He would sit at my kitchen table with a beer, and we would not talk very much. One night he said, "I am sorry, kid." I told him he had no reason to be sorry. He said, "I saw him walking up your driveway with a tool bag, and I did not do anything." I said, "Owen, if you had done anything, he would have known someone had noticed. He would have gotten what he came for a different way. You did not know." He said, "No." He said, "I did know. I knew there was something wrong about it." He was a plumber, Bennett. I saw him walking up to your door with a drill and a bag, and I knew it was wrong, and I said to myself, "He is Mrs. Pham's guy." And I let it go, because I did not want to be the neighbor who calls somebody's landlord over nothing. I told him it was nothing. He drank his beer. Sometimes when I am home late at night in my new place, I think about that pipe in the wall. $12,000. Sitting in a wall cavity behind drywall, Trent had painted himself in a house where his labor was in every joint and every fitting and every run of copper. Money he had put in there, thinking he would be back for it in a week. Money he had come back for 4 years later, patient and quiet, with a key he had made a copy of before he ever needed one. The thing I keep coming back to is what he thought he was doing. From his side of the wall, he was retrieving what was his. He was not a monster. He was not planning to hurt anyone. He was just a man who had put his savings inside a wall and had come back for it. He had made a reasonable plan given his situation. Work the wall a little at a time on weekdays. Do not be seen. Do not be heard. Do not draw landlord's attention. Do not make trouble with the tenant. Get what is yours. Leave. That was his plan. It was a good plan. It almost worked. I got sick on a Wednesday. If I had not gotten sick that Wednesday, he would have finished on a Wednesday. He would have taken his money and left, and I would have come home from work that night, and I would have never known he had been there. I would have kept living in that house and paying that rent and counting my cans in the pantry, and the wall behind the water heater would have had a new patch of drywall on it that I would have noticed one day and blamed on Mrs. Pham's son. He would have never touched me. He would have never come near me. And I would have never known. That is the part I cannot let go of. Not that a stranger had a key to my house. Not that he came in when I was gone. Not even that I got out of a bedroom window in my socks at 2 p.m. on a sick day. It is that if the fever had come one day later, I would still be living there. I would still think I lived alone. And the person I would think I was in the house alone with on all those quiet evenings would be me. The knock came at 11:40 on a Saturday night in June, and it came the way a friend knocks. My roommate was in Bend for the weekend, and I was alone on the couch with a bowl of ramen in my lap, and I got up expecting a neighbor or a delivery driver at the wrong house. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man I had been driving home from the same bar in the Pearl District once or twice a week for 8 months, and I understood in that second that I had been wrong about him for 8 months, and that he had somehow found out where I lived. My name is Bo. I bartend 3 nights a week at a place off Northwest 11th Avenue, and I drove rideshare on the other nights and weekends because my share of rent had gone up and my other job had not. I lived at the time in a small blue rental house in the Selwood neighborhood with my roommate Nathan, who worked in inventory management for a distributor over on Swan Island. Nathan is a good roommate. Quiet, tidy, does his dishes, keeps his door shut. We had lived together for about a year. He had a girlfriend in Bend he visited about 1 weekend a month, which meant 1 weekend a month I had the house to myself. The rideshare thing is a specific kind of work. You've got a lot of small windows into people's lives, one after another, and most of them you never see again. Airport runs, bar runs. Trader Joe's runs on a Sunday afternoon. People forget you are there. They take work calls. They cry in the back seat. They tell you the whole story of their divorce because you are a stranger and they will never see you again. You learn to be pleasant, keep the temperature comfortable, keep the music low, and get them to their destination. That is the job. You get regulars sometimes. Not many. But sometimes the app pings you for the same rider more than once. And eventually you recognize the pickup spot, and you know the person before they get in. I had a regular in the Alphabet District, a older woman always going to the same gym at 6 a.m. I had a couple I picked up from the airport twice a year when they came home from visiting family in Colorado. I had a bar manager over in Slabtown who used to take me back to his condo on Sunday nights. And I had Emmett. Emmett started riding with me in the fall. The first time I picked him up was at a cocktail bar on Northwest 23rd Avenue, one of those places with the low lighting and the 2-hour waits for a table. It was maybe 10:30 at night. He came out of the bar alone. He was thin, maybe 27, wearing a nice dark blue jacket and a pair of Chelsea boots. He got in the back seat and he said hello in a very polite, quiet voice, and he gave me an address on Southeast Umatilla in Selwood, which was not far from where I lived. I drove him. He did not say much. He tipped $6 in the app, which was on the higher end. 2 weeks later, the app pinged me again from the same bar. Same pickup, same drop-off. I recognized him. He recognized me. He said, "Hey, you drove me last month." I said, "Yeah, I did." He said, "Small world." He tipped $7 that time. By the third ride, he was a regular. He would ping me almost every Friday night, sometimes Saturdays too. He was always alone. He always came out of the same bar, or one very close to it. He always got dropped off at the same house, in Selwood. He was always polite. He always tipped well. He started talking a little more each time. Not much. Small things at first. He would ask me how my night was going. He would ask if I had gotten any weird passengers that shift. I told him a couple of funny stories, the way you do. He laughed at them. He asked if I was a full-time driver. I said no, I was a bartender too. He asked where. I told him. I know I should not have told him, but you tell people. You tell people. It is the job. He asked me my name. I told him my name. He told me his. That was the exchange. Then he started asking different kinds of questions. He asked me if I lived in the neighborhood. I said, close by. I did not give him an address. He asked if I had a girlfriend. I said no, but I was seeing someone. That was not exactly true. I said it because I wanted to shut down a certain kind of question early. He asked me what she did for a living. I made something up. He asked me if she lived with me. I said no. He asked if I had roommates. I said one. He asked what my roommate did. I said, look, man, I do not really do the passenger interview thing. He laughed. He said, sorry, I ask a lot of questions. I am kind of a nerd. He said it in the way people say a self-deprecating thing when they want you to like them anyway. Now let it go. He tipped $10 that night. Around February, I started to notice him at my bar. The first time was on a Thursday. I was working the front bar, and I looked up to see him sitting at the far end near the service well. I did not recognize him for a second, because I had never seen him outside of the back seat of my car. He had a beer in front of him, and he was scrolling on his phone. When he noticed me looking, he waved. He waved the way you wave at a friend. Small, casual, palm forward. I nodded. I made him a drink. He tipped $10 on a $15 tab. He came back on Saturday. He came back the next Thursday. He came back the next Saturday. He always sat at the same end of the bar. He always tipped hard. He always waved when he came in. He was never a problem. He never got drunk. He never got weird with the other customers. He was there for 2 or 3 drinks, and then he would order a ride share, and about half the time he got me as the driver. When he did not get me, he would text me from the back seat of someone else's car. Bar was great tonight. Sorry I did not get you as the ride. Have a good night, man. He had my number, because I had given it to him. He had asked for it after our 4th or 5th ride. I told him I was not really allowed to give my number out through the app. He said, no, I know, just in case there is ever an issue with the app, in case I ever need to reach you. I said, okay. I gave him my number. I did it because he was polite, and he tipped well, and I did not want to be the kind of driver who withholds a phone number from a nice guy over a small ask. That was the mistake. I know it now. I knew it a couple of weeks later. It was already too late. The thing that started to unsettle me was a comment he made in the car one Friday night in April. We had picked up from the usual bar. It was about 10:45. I was tired. I had worked the bar the night before, and I was pulling a rideshare shift because rent was due. He got in the back seat and he said, "Hey, Bo, how is your sister doing?" I have a sister. Her name is Cassidy. She is 7 years older than me. She lives in Eugene. I had never told Emmett I had a sister. I had never told him her name. I had never told him where she lived. I said, "What?" He said, "Your sister in Eugene. I saw on your Instagram she just had a baby. Congratulations." I have an Instagram account. I do not use it much. Cassidy is not tagged in the account. I had posted one photo of her from my niece's birth in March, and the caption said, "So proud of you." I had not tagged her because she does not do social media. I had not tagged the city. I had geotagged nothing. I had used my real name on the account because I had not thought I needed to hide it. But he had found it. He had gone through my posts. He had figured out I had a sister, and he had figured out where she lived, and he had figured out she had a baby, and he had sat in the back seat of my car and asked about her casually, like the way you ask about a friend's family. I said, "Thanks, man." I did not know what else to say. I drove him to Selwood. He tipped $15. He said, "Have a good night, brother." That word, brother, it landed wrong. The next morning I went into my Instagram settings and I made the account private. I removed my last name from the display name. I deleted the sister post. I went through my other posts to see how much I had geotagged over the years, and the answer was a lot. I had geotagged my bar. I had geotagged bars I hung out at. I had geotagged a coffee shop 3 blocks from my house. I had not geotagged my house, but if you had access to that many other pins, you could probably draw a circle around a neighborhood. I blocked Emmett in the rideshare app. It took me until Sunday to do it. When I did, I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself he was just a polite guy who was too invested. I told myself that he had tipped over $300 in 8 months and had never once said anything sexual or anything violent or anything that even a friend would flag. He had just asked about my sister because I had posted about her, because that was what people did. He came into the bar the next Thursday. I served him. He was quiet. He did not mention the blocked account. He did not ask why he had not been able to request me on his last 3 rides. He drank 2 beers. He tipped $12. He said, "Hey, Bo, if I did something to weird you out, I am sorry." I said, "No, man, you are good." He said, "Okay." He looked at me for a second and he said, "I feel like we are friends." I said, "Yeah, well, you are a regular." That is what I said. "Yeah, well, you are a regular," because I did not know how to say the other thing. He said, "I know we do not hang out or anything. I know that. I just want you to know I appreciate the conversations." I said, "Yeah, no problem." He came back the next Thursday and the next Saturday. He came back on a Tuesday when I had not been on the schedule, but had picked up a shift. He came back on nights I was not there and left messages with the barbacks to tell me hi. Then Nathan left for Bend. Nathan told me on Wednesday morning that he was going up to see his girlfriend that weekend. He would leave Friday after work and be back Sunday night. I said, "Okay." I told him to drive safe. I did not think anything of it. It happened once a month. I worked a bar shift on Friday night. I did not see Emmett at the bar that night. I did not think about him. Saturday morning, I woke up at 10:30. I made coffee. I went for a walk. I got groceries at the New Seasons on Southeast 16th. I came home. I did laundry. I watched a Timbers game with the sound off and the podcast on. I ordered ramen from a place on Milwaukee Avenue, and I picked it up around 11:15. I was on the couch with the bowl in my lap when the knock came at 11:40. 3 raps. A pause. 3 more. I looked through the peephole, and Emmett was standing on my porch. He had a bottle of red wine in his hand. He had on the blue jacket. He was smiling in a way I had never seen him smile. It was a nervous smile. It was the smile of a guy who had done a difficult thing and was hoping it was going to work. I stepped back from the peephole. I did not open the door. I stood in my hallway and I tried to think. He knocked again. He said, "Bo, I know you are home. I saw your kitchen light." He said, "I brought wine. Can I come in?" I did not say anything. I picked up my phone off the couch. I dialed 911, and I did not press call yet. I walked into the kitchen, and I looked at the back door. It was locked. The blinds were open. I closed the blinds. I walked back to the front door. I stood behind it. I said, "Emmett, what are you doing here?" He said, "I just wanted to see you." I said, "How did you get my address?" He was quiet for a second. He said, "I looked you up. Public records. I know your last name from your Instagram. It was not hard." He said, "I know that is weird, Bo. I know. but I have been wanting to talk to you for a while, and every time I try at the bar, it feels like I do not get enough time. I just wanted to have a real conversation, like actual friends do." I said, "We are not friends, Emmett. I am sorry. I am your driver. I am your bartender. That is what we are." He was quiet for a longer time. Then he said, "I really do not think that is true." I pressed call on the phone. The dispatcher picked up. I said the address as quietly as I could. I told her a man had shown up at my house who I had a restraining order against. That was not true yet. I said it because I thought the word restraining order would make her take it seriously. I told her he was on the porch. I told her I was inside. I told her I did not know if he was armed. I told her he was calm right now, but I could not predict him. She said, "Is he trying to enter the residence?" I said, "No. He is standing on the porch talking through the door." She said, "Stay on the line. Stay behind the door. Do not open it. Units on the way." I said, "Okay." Then I said to Emmett, loud enough for him to hear through the door, "Emmett, I am calling the police right now. I am on the phone with them. They are on the way. You need to leave." He was quiet for a very long time. I could hear him breathing on the other side of the door. And then he said, "Please do not do that." I said, "I am doing it. You need to leave." He said, "Bo, please." He said, "I did not mean this. I did not mean to scare you. I just wanted to talk. I have been trying to talk to you for months. I just wanted to sit down and have a glass of wine." He was crying. I could hear it. He was standing on my porch with a bottle of wine, and he was crying, and he was talking through the door to a man he had convinced himself was his friend. I did not open the door. I did not tell him it was going to be okay. I did not say anything else. I stood in the entryway, and I waited for the police. He sat down on my porch. I heard the wood creak. He sat there for maybe 8 minutes. He was quiet mostly. Once he said, "Please." Once he said, "I am sorry." Once he said, "I really thought we were friends." The police came at 11:53. 2 officers. They talked to him on the porch. He did not fight. He did not run. He set the wine down, and he stood up, and he put his hands behind his back when they asked him to. He told them he had come by to have a conversation with a friend. He told them he did not understand why I had called them. They asked him if he had ever been asked not to come to my residence before. He said he had not. He said, "I have never been to his residence before. This is my first time. I just wanted to see him." They took him downtown. One of the officers stayed at the house with me. She was maybe 50, gray at the temples. Her name badge said Kellner. She sat at my kitchen table and she wrote up the report and she talked me through the next steps. She said, "You should file for a restraining order first thing Monday morning." She said, "Do you feel safe here tonight?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "Is there somewhere else you can stay?" I said, "My roommate is out of town. My parents live in Corvallis and I do not have anyone else in the area." She said, "We can have a unit do drive-bys tonight." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Is there anything else you want to tell me about him?" I told her about the rides. I told her about him showing up at the bar. I told her about the questions about my sister. I told her about the Instagram. I told her about the way he had waved at me across the bar like a friend. She listened to all of it. When I was done, she looked at me and she said, "Has he ever threatened you?" I said, "No." She said, "Has he ever touched you?" I said, "No." She said, "Has he ever damaged your property?" I said, "No." She was quiet. Then she said, "Sir, I want to be honest with you. The behavior you are describing is not a criminal case yet. It is a pattern of behavior that will probably escalate." She said, "The fact that he showed up at your residence is the escalation." She said, "You did exactly the right thing. Filing for the restraining order tomorrow is exactly the right thing." She said, "But I want you to know." She said, "Sometimes when a person like this is told no in a clear way, it stops, and sometimes it does not." I said, "What happens if it does not?" She said, "Then you call us again." That was 15 months ago. I have not seen Emmett since that night. I filed the restraining order the following week. His hearing was 3 weeks later. He did not contest it. He looked at me across the courtroom the whole time the judge was talking, and he did not seem angry, and he did not seem sorry. He just looked tired. I quit rideshare a month after the incident. I did not want to be findable through the app anymore. I moved out of the house in Selwood in October when the lease was up. Nathan and I got a place further east, in a bigger building with a keypad on the lobby door. I stopped bartending at the Pearl District bar and started bartending at a place in the Hollywood District instead. Officer Kellner called me a few weeks after the hearing. She said she had some information she thought I would want. She said Emmett had been evicted from his own apartment in December, about 10 months before he came to my door. He had lost his job around the same time. He had been staying with his mother in a small house off Southeast Foster. Every Friday and Saturday night he had told his mother he was going out with friends. He had taken the bus to that bar in the Pearl District, sat alone with a beer or two, taken a rideshare home, but not to his mother's house, to an address in Selwood on Southeast Umatilla, which turned out to be the house his ex-girlfriend had lived in before they broke up. Kellner said his ex-girlfriend still lived there. Kellner said Emmett had never gone up to her door. He had gotten out of the rideshare, walked around the block, and taken a different bus back to his mother's. The nice bars and the good tips and the tailored jacket had been paid for out of what savings he had left. It had all been an act. Or, worse than an act, it had been the shape of a life he had wanted to have, put on top of a life he did not have anymore. And the person he had built the shape around, the one point of consistency in his week, the person he told his story to in a series of quiet 15-minute conversations from the back seat of a compact sedan, had been me. He did not have anyone else. That is, the part that I still think about. He was not a violent person. He was not a bad person. He was a lonely person, and I was one of the very few humans in his week who spoke to him like an adult and asked about his day. I did that because it was my job. And he built something out of it because he had to build something out of something. I think about what my job is. I served people drinks. I drove people home. I was polite. I asked about their nights. I let them tip me. And I said thank you, and I gave them a smile and a wave when they came back. This is normal work. It is what everyone in service work does. And somewhere, in one specific person's head, all of that added up to a friendship worth a bottle of wine and a knock on a door at 11:40 on a Saturday night when he thought I was alone. I do not bartend on weekend nights anymore. I do not drive rideshare at all. I do not post on social media under my last name, and I keep my accounts private, and I ask new people not to tag me. Nathan still lives with me. He knows to look through the people first now, every time, even on a Tuesday afternoon. Sometimes, when he is out of town, I sit in the living room with a book and I keep the front porch light off. I have not opened the front door after 9 at night to anyone I did not text with first in over a year. Because the picture I was making the whole time, without knowing I was making it, was of a person who lived alone and worked in service and was kind to strangers. That is not a person I know how to stop being. It is just my job. The only thing I can do is make sure the picture ends at the porch.